Thank you so much. It is really great to be here, and I'll just say a word of introduction. My bio is in the program, I believe. But my name is Eric Liu. I founded and run a nonprofit called Citizen University. And all our work is about really trying to teach and democratize understanding of how power works in civic life. So pretty much everything you all have been doing this morning is right in our wheelhouse, and it's just incredibly exciting to spend some time with you all and learn about what you're doing. And our work, we're based in Seattle, Washington, it's where I live, but we do work all around the United States. Just this crazy couple of weeks, I was just this week in Chicago for the inaugural Obama Foundation Summit as former President and former First Lady Obama. That was a really special gathering. And one thing that really struck me about that gathering, I mean, it was a lot of cool people and speakers and programs or whatever, but the best thing was that President Obama said, and he meant it, that they had convened this group not so that he or his team could kind of tell folks what to do or what to believe when it came to civic engagement or civic power, but really to listen. And he did. He went into breakout sessions and just sat on the floor and listened to people talking, and he just kind of wove through there, and that was really inspiring. And then next week out in D.C., I'll be I run a program out of what's called the Aspen Institute, which is a think tank based in D.C., and our program will be co-hosting an event in D.C. with the George W. Bush Institute, and that will be about kind of how young people are forming their sense of civic identity in this digital age. And so I mentioned both of these just because I feel like wherever you come from in this state, wherever you locate yourselves politically, wherever your family thinks of itself as kind of identifying politically or civically, we're in a moment right now where across the political spectrum, across the left and the right, people are waking up to the need to get literate in power and to start taking responsibility for exercising their power in civic life. And I think that's what's super interesting about how both the Obama Foundation and the Bush Institute are kind of doing the same thing from related angles. And I think it's an exciting time in that sense. What I wanted to do this afternoon is speak for a little while and lay out some thoughts, and then I know we're going to have some time for Q&A here, during which several Texas Youth Ambassadors are going to join me for Q&A and conversation, and really hopefully open it up more widely. But what I want to talk about here is a particular way to think about citizenship. When I say citizenship, when I talk about Citizen University, when I describe this Aspen Institute program on citizenship and American identity, I want to make one thing clear just at the outset, what I mean when I say citizen. I'm not talking in this context about documentation status under our immigration or naturalization laws. When I say citizen, I'm talking about a deeper, kind of more ethical sense of being a member of the body, okay? Being a contributor to community. And I think the reality is, and I think we all know this, and maybe some of you live this reality, there are plenty of folks in this country who lack the documents but live like big citizens. And there are plenty of folks in this country who have the documents but don't, right? And so I think a big emphasis in our work at Citizen University is on really getting to this underlying ethical layer of what it means to show up for others, right? Now, of course, the other debate about immigration and documentation status and pathways to citizenship for our undocumented friends, neighbors, and relatives, that's a real debate, and it matters, and citizenship in the legal sense does have to mean something, right? But I just wanted to kind of say at the outset, definitionally, what I mean when I talk about citizenship. Another way that I'd like to kind of frame up this broad topic of citizenship is with a simple kind of quasi-scientific little equation or formula, which goes like this: P plus CH equals CI. Right? This is something that don't treat it like science, but it's a nice little shorthand, right? And what the shorthand stands for is this: power plus character equals citizenship. Okay, and in some, to be fluent in power and understand how power works, plus being grounded in a sense of civic character is what it actually means to show up as a citizen, right? And so let me actually unpack each part of that equation a little bit here. So power. I know some of you, maybe in your kind of pre-prep materials or whatever, might have seen a TED Talk that I've given about power. And if you have, you know that I often define power very simply as a capacity to ensure that others do as you would like them to do, right? And to some folks, that's kind of like, whoa, that sounds kind of, Game of Thrones or House of Cards or kind of, evil or dark. And I really say, like, no, like, get comfortable with that definition because, get real. In every part of our lives, with our classmates, with our friends, with our families. As humans, we are always trying to get others to do as we would like them to do, right? That capacity, when it plays out on issues of common concern and public interest, that's civic power, right? How you're actually mobilizing different forms and sources of civic power. And to be, I've already used this phrase a couple of times, literacy in power. I really do believe that understanding power is a matter of literacy, like being able to read and write, right? I got to town yesterday, checked into my hotel, got the Austin Statesman, what's the name of the paper? Statesman? American? Yeah. The Statesman. And maybe some of you looked at the headlines too. Just right there on page one were two or three articles that required two kinds of literacy. Of course, one, you have to be able to read and read the paper, right? But the other is you have to be able to read power to understand the significance of what these articles were actually saying, right? One article was about how the Austin City Council has been trying to evade open meetings laws in their process of hiring a new city manager, and so they do kind of a for-show public meeting, and then they've been trying to go kind of, off-site somewhere else where people wouldn't see them or know them to have kind of deeper discussions or interviews with candidates, right? That's an interesting thing, right? And the headline makes you think, oh, well, on one level, that's just politicians sneaking around. But there's a deeper question here, right? There's a deeper issue about power and about who it is that's deciding on something as important as a city manager, which is a very powerful, kind of a statutorily powerful role here in Austin. But it's also about kind of process and whether you take seriously the letter and the spirit of the law, right? There's open meetings laws for a reason, because we used to have in this country all kinds of decisions made behind, in the kind of proverbial smoke-filled rooms. Or if you were fans of Hamilton, the room where it happened, right? The room where it happened where you weren't allowed to be in, where you didn't even know there was a room where it was happening, right? And we have open meetings laws to try to create transparency so that the public, which has an interest in the outcomes of these meetings, can see, right? But you have to be kind of literate in power to understand the significance of this article as something other than just, oh gosh, politicians trying to move meetings around or whatever. No, this is something deeper, right? Then there was another article about a member of Congress who represents part of Austin here, Lamar Smith, who just announced his retirement, right? And I was reading that article, and he's been in Congress for several decades now. And my first thought was, knowing that Lamar Smith is a very conservative Republican, was why does Austin care about Lamar Smith? Like, surely he doesn't represent Austin, right? But then as I read more closely, I realized, oh, the way that redistricting has unfolded in this state, districts were drawn such that the kind of the mass of progressive voters in the city of Austin basically got sliced up and carved up, right? And its clout got kind of diluted such that many pieces of Austin belong to many other districts that extend all across this state, right? In the kind of classic gerrymandering shape, right? And so you read that article, and again, on one level, it might just be, oh, interesting article about a guy who served for 30 years, done some good stuff, done some controversial stuff, interesting, okay. But no. There's a layer deeper here, right? And the layer deeper is about how is it that this guy got to be representing part of Austin, right? And how is it that happened? And so in both these stories, the city council trying to evade open meetings laws, and then the redistricting that results in a guy like Lamar Smith representing a part of Austin, there's an underlying question here which I think is at the heart of all civic power, and it is this: who decides? Like, you're getting a lot of sophisticated information here, you're meeting a lot of cool practitioners in this symposium, but you can really boil down all of civic power to the two-word question, who decides, right? Who decides who the city manager is going to be? Who decides what responsibilities a city manager has? Who decides whether a city manager should be doing stuff that in other parts of the country a mayor does, right? An elected a person accountable to the people, right? Who decided that? Well, somewhere there's probably a statute here in the state of Texas that governs the relationship between city managers and mayors, right? Because cities are creatures of the state, right? Something which your mayor, who I recently met, expresses frustration about, because the city of Austin would love to be doing stuff on the $15 minimum wage or on this or on guns or whatever, but the state legislature of the state of Texas can preempt the city, because the city is not truly its own entity. The city is just a unit of the state, right? Well, who decided that? Right? You can keep on peeling that onion and keep on coming to these questions of who decides, right? And I tee that one up, not to say there's a right or wrong answer. You may all have very differing views on how the power ought to be allocated in the city of Austin in relation to the state of Texas. But the deeper question is, somebody decided this at some point. And it wasn't carved on stone tablets. It was humans who, operating out of their own interests in a particular circumstance, decided it. And those decisions can be relitigated and re-argued and undone and remade, right? If you see them that way. The same thing about redistricting, the question of who decides. And so with that question in mind, it's really worth thinking about just what do we mean when we say power? Well, I define it broadly as this capacity to ensure that others do as you would like them to do on these questions of common and civic concern. But there are also it's worth thinking about different sources of civic power and different conduits through which those sources flow, right? So there are sources of power that kind of obvious to all of us, right? People power, money power, right? Ideas power, the power of social norms to kind of define or shift or redefine what people think is okay behavior, right? State action is a source of power, of course, right? Force and violence are a source of power in civic life, whether in an officially sanctioned monopoly through police departments or on the streets in ways that are not being controlled, right? But these are all different sources of power. And these sources of power in any community are flowing through conduits like institutions, right? Networks, narratives, right? You all spent some time this morning, I know, talking about stories of power and the stories that you're telling yourselves about your own power or lack thereof. And I hope one of the things that kind of the light bulb that went off for you as you did that is to realize the ways in which narrative itself is this conduit through which power flows. And when people keep on telling the same story about themselves, oh, we're just in a part of town that's always been overlooked. Oh, we're on the wrong side of the tracks. Or, or conversely, oh, my community has always been showing up. We've always kind of had a lot of clout, we always get our calls returned, right? The stories that you tell reverberate out and become themselves conduits of power that people respond to and through which money, people, ideas, and social norms will flow, right? So these kinds of these sources and conduits of power, when you actually start mapping them, you begin to get a crisper, tangible sense of what I mean when I say read and write power, literacy and power, right? You can literally map some of this stuff, right? I mean, if we wanted to, whatever town you're from, I know only some of you are from Austin, right? If you're from El Paso, if you're from Fort Worth, wherever you are from, right? East Texas, Galveston, Houston, wherever you're from, you can draw a map. Even today, even though you may think, well, I'm not super sophisticated about my town or about politics, even right now, you could draw a map on a whiteboard and you could kind of roughly identify what some of the key sources of power are in your community. Maybe it's this big oil company, maybe it's this big health center, maybe it's this big university, maybe it's whatever, right? And then you'll be able to actually draw then some of the conduits through which these sources of power are flowing in your community, right? Maybe your town is one that has just one newspaper and it's dominated and by the one guy who's been kind of shaping public opinion in that community for a long time, right? Maybe in your town it's a pastor who isn't elected to anything but is the person that everybody goes to first as a moral authority and as a kind of source of guidance and help. And maybe that pastor is the person who is that conduit of power, right? But being able to draw that map of power helps you read and write power and understand as you draw that, hey, I just drew that map. I could probably redraw it, right? And so that's when you make that pivot from reading to writing power, right? It is one thing to read, and it's a lot. I mean, you're students right now, you're in your arc of education, and a big part of that is truly being able to understand how things get decided. If you want to put it in more, in the darker terms of our politics today, whether it's from the Trump side or the Sanders side, how games get rigged, right? You want to understand how games get rigged, right? This is a good time to study how games get rigged, right? And this is not, by the way, a 2017 phenomenon. This did not get invented right now. I mean, you can go across town here and go to the LBJ Museum and, or go read the great Robert Caro biographies of LBJ and learn about the ways in which when LBJ was your age and he was at, what was it, San Marcos Teachers College, right? And at that college, there was kind of an in-group, a cool group called the White Stars, and he wasn't let in, and he didn't like that, and so he created kind of a counter group called the Black Stars, and he organized, and he got ultimately this kind of group called the Black Stars started to dominate student government, the fraternity council, the this, the that, like. It was your age. He began to read and write power, right? Not necessarily on issues of great national concern or anything. It was just in the context of the four corners of that campus. But he was highly attuned to being able to read that map, but then also thinking, hey, I could redraw that map, right? Because I'm not sure I like the way it's drawn right now. And so that notion of literacy and power is super important. And I think, this new book of mine, You're More Powerful Than You Think, is a book that in which I try to demystify and unpack this idea of power. And in the book, I talk about there being three core laws of power in civic life. And I think these are really worth just naming because each of these three laws also yields three imperatives for action, right, for you to start doing. So law number one is simply that power compounds. It concentrates, right? The more you have, the more you have. And that is both a matter of the rich getting richer, but it's also a matter of, people with some clout tend to get more clout. People who get quoted a little bit in the media tend to get quoted more in the media, right? The nature of systems is that advantage compounds, as does, of course, disadvantage, right? The other half of the what you might think of as the Matthew paradox from, Scripture is this is something that we have known from time immemorial, that as the rich get richer, also the poor get poorer. And that is left to themselves, systems will tend toward that kind of concentration and clumping, right? So that's law number one, power compounds. And we feel that one in our bones right now because you all have been coming of age during an era, congratulations. You are living through an historic era, which is the period of the greatest level of inequality and concentration of wealth this country has seen since just before the Great Depression. Right? Woohoo! How lucky are you to be alive today, right? I mean, this is, but this is a reality, and that reality radiates out in 100 ways. It radiates out in populist movements that feed both Trump and Sanders, and upend party establishments in both sides, right? It plays out in the rise of the Tea Party and the rise of Occupy Wall Street, right? At the same time, it plays out in all the sense of people saying, hey, the game is rigged. The dream that I was promised is not here, and we're going to knock the thing over, right? That's our politics right now. So law number one, power compounds. Law number two, power justifies itself, right? So at every turn, incumbent holders of power, whether they're individuals or institutions, will spin elaborate narratives about why it ought to be that way, right? Why that is in fact the natural God-given order of things, right? So, in the age of kings and emperors, those guys used to kind of spin an elaborate fairy tale of divine right? I am descended from God, so step off, right? My power is not to be questioned, right? And we can kind of chuckle at that today as Americans in the 21st century, but look around, right? We have all around us today our own contemporary versions of divine right and these narratives of self-justification, right? And they play out a lot of ways, right? White supremacy is a wonderful little narrative of self-justification, right? And male supremacy The idea that, in Silicon Valley, like, why are all these women making complaints about not having enough opportunities in tech? They should just be lucky, feel lucky to have opportunities to get on this great gravy train and make some money right now, or even more, that, maybe the reason why there aren't that many women in Silicon Valley is that, women's brains aren't wired right, and tech is it's a competitive environment, it's a guy's environment, and, the more you hear this stuff, and you hear this stuff, right? I'm not like making anything up. You hear this from tech bros up and down Silicon Valley, and I live in Seattle, which is kind of an orbit of Silicon Valley. You hear this all the time in ways subtle or unsubtle, right? And what it is a narrative of self-justification, right? This is the way it ought to be, right? So if all you had, though, were these first two laws, that power is always compounding and power is always justifying itself, you'd be kind of in a pretty grim doom loop, right? You'd be in a bad way. What fortunately saves us from that doom loop, potentially, is law number 3, which is this: power is infinite. Let me say it again. Power is infinite, right? I want to be really clear what I mean. I'm not coming from Seattle here to sell you a new age kind of, notion of, if you just manifest it, you can be as, wealthy or, that's not what I'm talking about. When I say power is infinite, I mean simply this, that in civic life, it is entirely possible in even the most seemingly unequal, rigged situations to generate brand new power out of thin air through the magic act of organizing, right? When you organize 1 or 10 or 100 other people to on some common endeavor requiring common strategies, going after some common goal, you have just, poof, generated power where it did not exist previously, right? And I think this reality is one that, number one, so many people forget, right? So many people forget that, the most self-fulfilling statement on earth is, I don't think I have any power. Congratulations, you have just guaranteed you have no power, right? When you say that. Now, the converse isn't true, right? That just thinking it makes it so. But organizing does make it so, right? And this is the story of our times right now. Every one of these movements, whether it's Occupy, the Tea Party, the Trump train, the Sanders, revolution, Black Lives Matter, the Dreamers, $15 now, right? All these movements right now that are upending our policy, and that's just the U.S., by the way, right? The Orange Revolution, the Umbrella Revolution, the Maidan Revolution, all these color revolutions around the world. These are all testament to the same thing right now, which is people are rediscovering that when you organize, you can generate new power out of thin air, right? Now, this reality here of our times, this period in which people are pushing back against this unequal, rigged feeling situation, doesn't guarantee anything, right? Because while people who feel like they've been ground down for a long time are discovering today that they can organize and generate brand new power, guess what? The status quo holders of power also remember that power is infinite, and they can counter-organize, and they can remobilize to kind of entrench, right? And this isn't a progressive conservative thing, right? I mean, my good friend Matt Kibbe, who's a former Tea Party founder and runs an organization now called Free the People, which is a libertarian organization that's speaking to your generation about why libertarianism ought to be appealing to you. He will say the same thing about the infinitude of power in trying to push back against what he sees as rigged games of big government, what he sees as rigged games of crony capitalism, what he sees as rigged games of unions dominating parts of our government sector, right? But in either case, whether you're coming from the left or the right, this idea right now that you can push back here also means that those who are status quo incumbent power holders, they will push back on your pushback, right? And you will get this kind of endless churn of organizing and counter-organizing, people mobilizing their money and ideas and people, and then others counter-mobilizing against that. And you know what? There's a word for that churn, that kind of constant, never-ending swirl of organizing and counter-organizing. Politics, right? Politics in a democracy. And so this is a thing that I don't need to tell you. You're here because you already kind of have an instinct for why this matters. But I think we've got to get out there, you've got to get back out to the rest of the state of Texas and tell your neighbors and family and friends why this stuff matters, right? Again, when I got to my hotel, there's a copy of Texas Monthly in my hotel room. And so I started flipping through it. There's an article about this utility here in the state of Texas. Let me see if I got the name of it here. Sherryland. Ever heard of Sherryland, any of you? Okay, so Sherryland. So this is an electric utility, right, that operates across the state, but particularly in West Texas. And this article was about how in rural West Texas, you have a lot of farmers and small towns and churches that are paying $1,000 a month for electricity, right? And these churches are going under, and they literally can't afford to keep the lights on because, no matter how much you pass the plate, it's hard to sustain a $1,000 a month electric bill, right? And that's just the churches. I mean, all the residents too, stopping with cable TV, only using a fridge and not a freezer, all this stuff. And the article describes the ways in which this came to be, right? Because you look at that situation and you ask, who decides? How did this come to be that, in West Texas, where you see wind turbines going up, a place where there's all kinds of new renewable wind energy coming up, why should electricity cost $1,000 a month for a church? And it turns out that the game had been rigged such that this utility, Sherryland, charges not for the actual electricity itself, but it charges for the right to send that electricity over lines that they own, right? So they literally hold a monopoly on the lines through which your power, your publicly generated power, flows, right? And they have this tolling, gating power to say, yeah, I think we'll make it $1,000 a month. I think we'll turn it up a little bit more. And because these small town pastors and farmers and residents have no recourse, because it's a monopoly situation, that's what they've got to deal with, right? So reading this article, it's enough to get you really mad, right? And that's not a left-right Republican Democrat issue, right? You ought to be mad if you run a small church in small town West Texas and a utility has rigged the game to kind of crush you, right? And what this article goes on to say is that the residents of these communities discovered that power is infinite and started organizing and started showing up and started figuring out and started drawing that map and asking who decided this stuff, right? And they started going to the meetings of the Public Utilities Commission of the state of Texas, right? They started getting their state legislators to start pushing bills here in Austin to regulate this kind of behavior, to put limits on how much these utilities could exploit their monopoly position, right? And a whole bunch of twists and turns. That particular utility ended up getting bought out by another, and so a new one has come in promising lower rates. We'll see, right? We shall see. But the point is, the legislation that was proposed here in Austin never actually got enacted. Why? Because counter-organizing happened, because the kind of trade association of electric companies and utilities said, no, we sympathize with these poor churches and these farmers, but this isn't the right venue through which to decide this stuff, right? We think not the legislature, but the Utilities Commission is the right venue to do this. And again, you have to, as a citizen, you have to persist if you want to right a wrong like that, right? It's not enough just to draw attention. Because the attention can kind of win you one round of the game. But once the counter-mobilizing happens, you've got to persist and keep on shining a light and keep on challenging back those folks, right, who are trying to re-rig the game. So these three laws of power I've described, number one, that it's compounding, number two, that it's always justifying itself, and number three, that it is nonetheless infinite, even though so many people are stuck in a very finite zero-sum mentality. These three laws yield three imperatives for action, okay? So if in the first place, power is always compounding into these monopolized winner-take-all games, then you got to change the game, right? You got to be thinking about what is the structure of the game and how can I either rewrite the rules or bypass this game altogether, right? And I'll give you an example of that, actually. Another friend of mine named Mark Meckler, who's former co-creator of the Tea Party Patriots, and now runs something called the Citizens for Self-Governance. His organization has been leading for many years now a push to call an Article 5 constitutional convention. Okay? Again, pull out your pocket constitution. Mine's on my phone here. You know, Article 5 of the Constitution tells you that if you get 3/4 of the state or 2/3 of the states, state legislatures to agree to pass a resolution, you can call a brand new constitutional convention. And they are doing this because they've been frustrated about how, under Republican and Democratic administrations, Washington, D.C. fails to rein in federal spending, fails to reduce our federal debt, right? And so they're like, we're going to bypass that game. We're not going to play that game anymore of trying to reelect a different Congress or trying to get a president who says this stuff. We're going to bypass that game, and even though it's painstaking and very laborious, we're going to get 34 states to pass these resolutions, and we're going to call a convention. And that convention's purpose is going to be to rein in federal spending. Now, if you didn't know, I used to work for Democrats. I do not share Mark Meckler's policy preferences, right? I do not want the outcome that he wants. However, I tip my hat at his ability and his team's ability to mobilize people power here and mobilize money power and ideas power here to change the game, right? They've got a couple of dozen of states now that have passed these resolutions, right? This is not some fanciful thing. It's completely within the realm of possibility that, certainly during your lifetimes, that something like this could happen, right? So that's changing the game. So if in the second place, power is always justifying itself and spinning these elaborate narratives of self-justification, then our second imperative is to change the story, right? And so, changing the story, I know you've been thinking about narrative a bit here, but I actually want to give you a concrete example from my life as a citizen in Seattle, where I live. So one of the great narratives of self-justification that I think is out there in our politics is the narrative of trickle-down economics. Right? The narrative that says that the super wealthy are job creators, and that and not unlike gods and kings, in a different age, they must be worshipped, right? They must be paid tribute. That we must not burden them too much, we must not tax them too much, because they are the source of our prosperity. Because job creators, the super wealthy, the 1%, if we trouble them too much, then their prosperity won't leak its way down to the rest of us, right? But if we pay our ritual kind of tribute to them, it will make its way down to us, right? Now, that's a narrative that's a very compelling, wonderful story, right? It happens to have zero basis in economic fact, right? But it's a very compelling story, and it makes some kind of interesting, intuitive sense to people that, yeah, somebody's rich, somebody who owns a company and runs a company, they're powerful, they are the source of my job, right? So don't trouble them too much, because I want my job, right? And for decades in this country, under Republican and Democratic administrations, that narrative of trickle-down economics has been a dominant narrative in which those who currently have high privilege justify their privilege. And we decided in Seattle, actually, I overstate, a group of low-wage airport workers in the town of SeaTac, which is next door to Seattle, which is where our international airport is. A group of low-wage baggage handlers, airport hotel janitors, people who work the late shift at the rental car garage, right? People who were making $9, $10, $11 an hour, they decided, you know what? We need a raise. We think the minimum wage in our community, which is a community completely populated by low-wage airport workers, many of whom are immigrants, many of whom are women of color, we decided that we need a raise and that we ought to have a $15 minimum wage, right? And this group of low-wage workers, in order to do this, didn't just say we want a raise, they actually changed the narrative. They combated the old narrative of trickle-down economics with a different narrative. And the different narrative that they used there in SeaTac said that the true source of prosperity is not the super wealthy up top. The true source of prosperity is people who work for a living. Because when workers have more money, businesses have more customers, right? When someone who's making $9 an hour starts to make $12 an hour, they don't park that extra $3 an hour in a numbered account in the Cayman Islands, right? They don't move that money offshore and buy gold bars, right? They take that extra $3 an hour and they take their family out to dinner. They take that extra $3 an hour and they actually get their kids new jeans for the start of the school year, right? They take that extra $3 an hour and they'll actually go and get their spouse flowers for their anniversary, not just a card, right? When you raise the wage at the bottom like that, you set in motion a positive feedback loop of increasing demand, right? And so these low-wage workers and their allies, including me, started offering this narrative that said that the source of prosperity doesn't emerge from the top down, it emerges from the middle out and the bottom up, right? And so having a middle out narrative as a counter to this trickle down narrative made this a different fight from what usually had been the fight around the minimum wage. Because the old fight around the minimum wage had been, this isn't fair, this isn't nice, right? It's not fair that people make so little working these hard jobs. And that'll get you some of the way. But when you can change the story to a middle-out economics story, you're saying, you know what, the reason to raise the wage is not just out of compassion or fairness. The reason to do it is that it'll be great for business. We'll all be better off when we're all better off, right? Every little small business, every little florist, every little grocer, every little restaurant's going to do better when more of this money is circulating in the economy rather than just sitting in the pockets of profit of the employers, right? Now, again, this is something that you can contest, and many people will contest as a matter of economics about the how much to raise the minimum wage, how much is too much, et cetera, et cetera. But once we're having that argument, we are having an argument on different terms. We are having an argument in a different narrative story box now, right? And I think this was the key that these low-wage workers in CTAC did. And by the way, they became a domino. Once $15 passed in CTAC, it happened that unfolded at the same time that a city council and mayoral race was unfolding in Seattle. And so everybody in that mayoral race got on the $15 train. And then Seattle became the first big city in the country to pass $15. And now 15 has just cascaded across the country, right? Now again, I told you earlier, counter-organizing will happen. Countervailing power, will be mobilized. And there are, St. Louis passed a higher minimum wage. And then the state of Missouri and their conservative legislature said, no, we preempt you. We do not allow you to raise the wage, right? This will go on and on and on. But I tell you this particular case study as one of changing the story. Now the last thing I want to say is, if in the third place, power is infinite, and yet people so often, including us a lot of the times, including you, I bet, but especially people who who wouldn't ever think about spending a day on a Saturday at a symposium like this, right? Your friends, your family members, whatever it might be. So many people are stuck in this zero-sum mindset about power, right? The zero-sum notion that if someone else gets more, I'm going to get less. The scarcity mindset. And if people are stuck in that mindset, then we've got to change the equation. We've got to remind people that power in civic life is not like heat or energy in physics, right? The laws of thermodynamics tell us that if someone in this room gets more heat or energy, then someone else in this room has to get less, right? Because it's a zero-sum deal. And that works in physics, but I'm not talking physics, I'm talking civics, right? And in civics, it's a positive-sum deal, right? When you learn to give a speech in public, when you learn to organize your neighbors, when you learn to canvass and knock on doors really effectively, when you learn how to write a really compelling argument in a letter to the editor, to the newspaper, you haven't diminished by one bit my ability to do any of those things. You haven't made me any less capable of affecting change, right? You've just added to the net amount of power circulating in the system, right? And I think one of the most important things for us to realize is in changing the equation this way, by organizing and by activating ourselves and each other, we can fundamentally change what's the frame of the possible in politics. And so, an example of people who've been changing the equation, that isn't even about electoral politics, actually. There are these two organizations starting on two different coasts. One is called Family Independence Initiative. Started in Oakland, now it's in like 6 or 7 cities around the country. And this was started by a guy named Mauricio Lim Miller, who was a liberal from California. He used to work in the state of California's welfare department, right? And he realized after decades in this kind of work that he was kind of part of the problem, that he was starting to see poor people just as clients, and that even though he had such good liberal intentions and the system had such good liberal intentions, they were dehumanizing the very people they were meaning to serve, right? Meanwhile, across the country in Washington, D.C., a guy named Bob Woodson, who founded something called the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, and had started as a kind of a leading activist on poverty and the conservative movement. In some ways, he's been Paul Ryan's mentor on urban poverty, and kind of taken him through not only parts of D.C. that have been really hard hit, but through other cities in the country. Bob Woodson was coming to the same conclusion at the same time, right? And what both of these folks realized was that our system of laws and government and social norms was treating poor people, particularly poor people in cities, and particularly poor people of color in cities, as clients, as problems, and as vessels in need of kind of aid to be poured into, right? And they both said, in parallel, without knowing each other, we got to change the equation, because we know, as Mauricio says, from his own family experience, he said, there's no such thing as a single mother, right? Anybody you know who's a single mother is not operating in isolation. She has a network of siblings and friends and aunts and relatives and neighbors and other people who are helping to fill in the patchwork of making life work, right? And Bob Woodson was seeing the same thing, that in these neighborhoods that are kind of racked with poverty and drugs and violence, that even in those neighborhoods there is somebody who people go to because they trust, because they go to turn for not just spiritual help but material help. And what they both decided to do was to activate these untapped, unseen, unacknowledged assets in these poor communities. People's wisdom, people's trust, people's relationship, people's own capacity through mutual aid to solve problems without going first to the bureaucracy of the welfare state, right? And what they have done, and they're both, by the way, they've both won MacArthur Genius Awards for their work around the country. What they've both done is fundamentally change the equation of power. Now, this isn't about voting or politics, but it is about people in our country who are forgotten, unseen, and often invisible, being reminded that they themselves, through mutual aid, by pooling money together to be able to start small businesses, by supporting each other in circles of faith to carry them through hard times, by creating extended kinship networks that help people get through hard economic patches. Now, all of this, of course, government is still necessary. Of course, government is still part of their lives. But what's getting activated here is the power of these citizens in the first place to determine the course of their own lives, right? And they're changing the equation. Now, I hope I've given you a sense in talking about changing the game, changing the story, and changing the equation of power, that in all this work, we live in a time right now where all the old lines of Republican, Democrat, red, blue, left, right are kind of getting scrambled, right? And that this broad topic of activating citizen power is one that doesn't belong to one side or the other. And that if you want to get truly literate in power, you've got to be able and willing to learn from people from the other side, whatever your side might be, right? Well, let me close then with a word about the other half of that equation that I started with. P plus CH equals CI, right? I've talked a lot about power here, but I want to say a word about character. Because if all you have is fluency in power, if all you have is this kind of literacy in the laws of power and the strategies of power and so forth, but you are otherwise untethered to any moral sense, otherwise ungrounded in any sense of civic character, then you are just a highly skilled sociopath. Right? And there's a lot of that around these days. There's a lot of that around these days, you know? However, if you are able to couple your knowledge of how power works with a commitment to making it work for everybody, for others, not just for yourself and not just for those who already currently have power, if you're able to do that coupling and that combination, then you're not a sociopath, you are a citizen. Right? That's what makes you a citizen. And when I say character, I'm not talking about individual virtues like perseverance and diligence and so forth. Those are important. Grit, right? There's a lot of talk these days about grit. Grit matters. Your presence here, all of you, is evidence of grit, right? You got here by grit. But I'm not talking about individual virtues. I'm talking about what you might think of as character in the collective. The social virtues of what it means to live in the company of others, to hold a community together, how you behave in public, right? How you'd want people in your family to see you behave in public, right? So these are virtues and values like service, sharing of sacrifice, reciprocity, contribution before consumption, right? Values like humility, simple empathy. The thing about character in civic life is that, well, both the presence and the absence of character are contagious, right? And I think this is something that is super important for us to remember right now. Our politics, our national politics, seems so completely poisonous and so completely devoid of character. And yet, again, in the same way that economically I don't believe in trickle-down, civically I don't believe in trickle-down. I believe that character also emanates from the middle out and the bottom up. I think that character emanates from the choices that you make about how to behave in the company of others. I believe that society becomes how you behave, actually. And that's never been more true than in this day and age of social media and networks that so rapidly make our behaviors so rapidly infectious, right? And so in a time like this, it actually is the fusion of character and power, to realize that you have the power to set off a cascade, a contagion of civic character, right? When you decide to serve, when you decide to sacrifice, when you decide to show up for somebody else, when you decide to risk a little bit of your capital, a little bit of your privilege, a little bit of your power to benefit someone else who might be, in today's political climate, disfavored, right? When you decide to take a stand for somebody, or if you like, take a knee for somebody, right? When you decide to do these things, you're actually deciding to exercise your power as well as your character, because the power you have is to make this kind of civic character contagious. And I think it's, the word character is very kind of old-fashioned and eat your vegetables and, all that stuff. And it's up to your generation, actually, to re-inhabit it and to reclaim it, right? Because it doesn't belong to scolds from one part of the ideological spectrum. It doesn't belong to people only who might come from a particular faith or religious background. The idea of character is what is fundamentally required if we're going to do self-government seriously, right? I think this is the thing that the note that I want to close on here. Our responsibility right now is, as a group here, right? I was talking earlier with some of the staff, like, this symposium has been going on for a decade now. So you have now entered an incredible network of people, of hundreds of people, up and down the state of Texas, who are shaping every part of civic life in this republic, right? And so you have to be a community for each other that is going to support each other, that is going to push each other, that is going to challenge each other about how you're getting literate in power and how you're exercising it, but also in how you're living up to some broader, higher notion of civic character, right? You have to do that for each other, and then as you do that for each other, you have got to be Johnny Appleseed. You got to be going across the state of Texas and spreading what I've just spread here, right? Because once you take inventory of your power, as I know you kind of did a little bit of this morning, right? Take stock of the different kinds of power you may actually have, the different dimensions of power that your civically healthy or unhealthy community might have. Once you take stock of how much people power you might be able to mobilize, how much money power you have access to, how much you can influence ideas power, right? How much you as a you all are nodes of networks, how you can influence social norms power. Once you take inventory of your power that way, you face a very simple binary choice. Shall I hoard or shall I circulate? Our times demand that we not hoard. our times demand that we be super intentional about circulating the power we have and the knowledge of power that we have. And I think if you do that together and hold each other to that standard, then this state's going to be in great shape. Thank you very much.
We'll bring out the chairs so just
Okay.
Great.
Okay, so we're about to step into
Hi everybody, my name's Cam Johnson. I go to the University of North Texas here in Denton, or not here, but
My name is Brooke Lopez, and I'm a senior graduating from the University of Texas at Dallas.
My name is Julia O'Hanlon. I'm a junior here at the University of Texas at Austin.
So we'll be doing a little bit of a Q&A today. Fun fact about all of us, we're all Texas Civic ambassadors. Really cool program, ran it here out of the Annette Strauss Institute with New Politics Forum. And basically what we do is we have taken a lot of time to learn about civic life here in Texas, and we're focused on creating conversations and bringing civics to people our age in our communities. So there are several other wonderful TCAs in the back if you guys want to wave real quick. And yeah, we're really excited to be here with you all.
So today we have a handful of questions that have been crowdsourced from our fellow TCAs, and in addition,
We're also going to be taking your questions. So again, it's Slido, sli.do. And that code is Civic Power, and then just type questions that you want to ask and upvote questions that you want to be asked, and I'll ask them.
All right, we'll jump right in.
Great.
okay, so the first question is, you served as the deputy assistant for President Clinton for domestic violence and served as a speechwriter and director of legislative affairs for the National Security Council, all at the White House.
Domestic policy, not domestic violence, just to be clear. I was not the assistant for domestic violence. That'd be a bad job title.
What inspired you to transition from a career in federal policy to career focused on civic leadership?
Great question. So I loved my time in Washington, D.C. I worked for President Clinton twice. As Brooke mentioned, I was a speechwriter in his first term, and then his deputy domestic policy advisor in his second. And before that, actually, I worked for a member of the United States Senate, who many of you may know just kind of regionally, a guy named David Boren, who at the time was a Democratic senator from Oklahoma, when there was such a thing. And for a couple of decades now, he's just retired, but for a couple of decades since has been president of OU. And so I love my time in Washington, D.C., and I really feel like I got a great grounding in a lot of the big issues of our day. But I always felt that there was something artificial about Washington. And it's not just the fact that no one's really from there, that everyone's coming from other parts of the country, and so there's kind of a rootlessness to the place. But even more than that, there's an artificiality to the politics of D.C. And this was true 20 years ago. It's even more true today, that a lot of what happens in D.C. is not so much the solving of problems, but the posturing about the solving of problems, right? And it's this kind of, if you know what kabuki theater is, this kind of, kind of a staged, kind of stylized form of theater and dance and posture in which everybody agrees, you're going to posture to do this to get your base fired up, and then I'm going to posture to get my base fired up about what you just did to get your base fired up, right? And that was true even a couple of decades ago when I was there, and I felt like I really wanted both to be rooted in a place and to have a bit more hands-on problem solving. And so I actually feel like as much as I learned in D.C., what I really learned about democracy and self-government, I have learned these last 17 years as a citizen of Seattle and of Washington State. It's been in Seattle where I served for a decade on the public library board. And we had to make decisions about how are you going to spend a couple $100 million from a bond measure in building these new library branches, and you're going to tick off these people, and you're going to make these people happy, and and people are going to think you need to build this kind of building, and others want this kind of building, like just hands-on stuff that where you're doing the work. It's in Washington. I mentioned the minimum wage work that I've been doing, but also I've been right after the Sandy Hook massacre several years ago. A group of citizens and I felt like we needed to do something in our state, and we ended up creating something called the Alliance for Gun Responsibility in our state that ended up leading to the enactment. We ended up being the first state in the union to pass by a direct vote of the people background checks for gun purchases, right? Now again, you may not like that policy, you may be of a different view on the Second Amendment and guns, but this was a great case study of civic power, of bottom-up people power, saying we got to do something, we got to mobilize, and in our state that measure won by 60%. It won in red counties and blue counties. It won the support of NRA members, and gun owners. And so it's been on the ground there that I feel like I've learned this stuff, and that's what's really motivated me to, what I said at the end there about you can either hoard or circulate, right? The more I've learned, both from DC and from this kind of citizen activism in my own city and state, the more I feel like I got to share this, I got to circulate this, right? And that is literally the point of Citizen University. Is to break this stuff down so it doesn't feel like it's mystical or stuff that only some people over there can do, but that anybody can do just by deciding to show up and organize and start mobilizing stuff. And so it's been this experience on the ground that made me feel like I wanted to share the knowledge.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I'll be shorter in my other answers. You got me fired up. Sorry.
So you've spent the past 2 years on the board of directors for the Corporation for National and Community Service, and that's a federal agency responsible for programs like AmeriCorps, Senior Corps, and the Social Innovation Fund. So just wondering why federal agencies like that are important to civic life here in the U.S.
Yeah, so let's even before we go to AmeriCorps, remember the case study I was telling you about, Sherryland and the electric utility in West Texas? You think about LBJ, like long before LBJ became the tragic figure that he was by getting us into Vietnam and so forth, but while at the same time enacting historic civil rights legislation. Long before all that, LBJ helped electrify Texas, right? FDR and the New Deal electrified Texas. I'm not talking like they got Texas excited. I mean, they electrified, they brought electricity to rural Texas, right? And so it's really worth remembering how much of the foundations of the economy and the polity of a state like Texas have relied over the decades on federal action, right? You think about the devastation in Houston. And I know citizens of this state have, and of course across the country, have stepped up in a big way to volunteer and send money and service. But Houston would be in a bad way if there were no such thing as the federal government, right? You think about the economy that built itself up around the space program in this state, and the reason why this state remains an aerospace powerhouse. That is because of the United States government, right? And so I think that I'm not here just to make a case for the federal government. The federal government does a lot of things stupidly and poorly, and I witnessed that firsthand. But I think it's important to remember that if you just demonize out of hand the federal government, even in a proud state like Texas, you're demonizing yourself. You're demonizing your own state's capacity to get stuff done. The Corporation for National Community Service was created 24 years ago on the idea that national service matters, right? That service, President George H.W. Bush got the ball rolling with his Points of Light initiative, really trying to use his bully pulpit to get more people to start volunteering and serving and participating in civic life the way many of you do. And then President Clinton was inspired by examples of things like City Year, which some of you probably have heard of, a youth service organization which young people your age devote a year of their lives in service to their community. And he said, I love this City Year idea. I love what at that time was this fledgling project called Teach for America. You know, I love these little programs that are sprouting up like this. I love something called Public Allies, which many of you may not know was where Michelle Robinson cut her teeth as an activist before she became Michelle Obama, right? And candidate Clinton in 91, 92 looked at the things like City Year and Public Allies and so forth and said, what if we had a national program like this that made it possible for young people to serve and for there to be a deal of reciprocity in the bargain, right? You serve and we'll help you make your way and pay for college, right? You give a period of a year or 2 years to your country this way, and we will give you a stipend and give you relief on your student loans, right? And that bargain, that sense of this isn't charity, this isn't a handout, this is a deal of reciprocity, has always been at the heart of AmeriCorps. And AmeriCorps has thrived in the couple of decades since under both Republican and Democratic administrations. And I think that's because people have come to see in this country, certainly during disasters. I mean, you know, it wasn't just FEMA that was on the ground in Houston after the hurricane. It was something called FEMA Corps, which is a partnership between AmeriCorps and FEMA. It was a lot of the young people who are involved in different volunteer agencies that AmeriCorps and the corporation connect with. And so, you know, the thing about national service that I think is super important too in a diverse state like Texas and a diverse country like ours, we are so fragmented right now. And it's never been easier, thanks to social media and technology, for us basically, for birds of a feather to flock together, for us just to sort ourselves into little, you know, I'm only going to hang out with people who share my politics, share my worldview, share my economic background, share my race, whatever, right? It's super easy to do that today. And there are few, if any, institutions in our country that require us or invite us to scramble and mix it up, right? And national service is one of those institutions. You go to you know, any AmeriCorps program in the state of Texas right now, and you will find people brought together and thrown together, kind of like you all, from very different economic backgrounds, from very different ideological backgrounds, from very different life experiences. And the thing that's great about national service is it doesn't bring you and me to get together to talk about you and me and how different you and I are, right? There's some value in that, but what it does is it gets you and me to come together so that we can work on a third thing, right? Let's you and I go help clean up this part of Houston. Let's you and I go fix this school in East Austin, right? Let's do this thing. And working on that third thing, it's by working on that third thing that you and I start to realize how much you and I actually have in common, right? Even though we didn't realize it before. That we solve problems the same way, that we laugh about the same things in certain ways, that we have the same kind of mentor or tormentor in our life, right? Whatever the universal human things are, you learn that stuff by doing a third thing together, and that's what national service is all about.
Nice.
That leads really well into this next question, which is how can you discuss power intelligently within our polarized political climate? Is a concept approach better than discussing partisan politics overall?
Great question. I think it's really hard. You know, Thanksgiving's coming up. You're all going to be having Thanksgiving dinners, and around that table will be people with whom you probably differ on politics, right? Some of your families have probably made a truce agreement to, like, you know, we're only going to. Well, I was going to say we're only going to talk football, but now that's talking politics too, right? And so, you know, we're only going to talk turkey, okay? That's a fine, fine bird. Yeah, it's a great-looking bird, you know. And, you know, so that's coming up. And I think one of the things that we have to have in our head as we get into these situations is before you can just dive into, let's talk about our partisan differences, like you've got to establish, or in some cases reestablish, a baseline foundation of trust, right? And how do you lay that foundation of trust? You lay that foundation of trust by rehumanizing, right? So one of the programs that's in our network at Citizen University is this great nonprofit called Living Room Conversations. And Living Room Conversations was founded by a liberal from Berkeley who co-founded MoveOn.org and a former Tea Party founder, right? And they started literally in a living room having conversations, getting to kind of deal with each other, and they developed and devised this template for how you do this. And the template goes like this. you spend about 80% of your time talking about the universal human dimensions of who you are. Like, how are your values formed? What were the big influences in your life, right? What shaped you? Like, why do you, how did you come to see the world the way you do, right? Who have been your mentors or tormentors, right? And you start asking life experience questions like that about what's influenced you and how do you pass it on and so forth. Then suddenly that person who you might have thought literally was a demon when they walked in the room, right? Suddenly you realize, oh, okay, like, yeah, wow, that one hit me in a way that I didn't expect. Like, I had something like that happen to me too. Or, you know, I realized that, you know, at least I understand you, right? And so 80% of that template is focused on the kind of rehumanizing. And then 20% is a very guided, structured way to, okay, let's talk about issues now, right? So we've unpacked how we come to our worldview. Why is it that you're such a fierce individualist and such a fierce believer in the necessity of being armed and having, you know, a robust Second Amendment, right? And why is it that you come to the view that, that you have about guns, right? Now, let's talk about what it is that we might want to try to do in common, right? And the goal of living room conversations is not to have people coming out holding hands, singing Kumbaya, and agreeing on policy, right? The goal is actually just to rehumanize politics. And you know, we at my Aspen Institute program, we're launching a new project called the Better Arguments Project. And this is on the idea that I actually don't think, you know, there are a lot of people who say in our polarized politics right now, like, we need to argue less. I don't think we have to, I don't think what we need is fewer arguments in American civic life. I think we just need less stupid arguments, right? And what I mean by that is, like, remembering, well, there's one layer of that, which is getting emotionally intelligent, right? So everything I was just describing, like understanding you as a human and your kind of psychosocial, psychographic, emotional, like, bundle. Like, why do you come at stuff the way you come at stuff, right? That's being emotionally intelligent when you begin an argument. But then there's also one that's just civically intelligent, historically intelligent, right? And that's recognizing that, like, almost all of American civic life is an argument. Like, America is an argument, right? You can boil down all of American civic life into these kind of 5 or 6 core timeless tensions, right? There's a tension between liberty and equality that's baked into the Constitution, right? There's a tension between strong central government and strong local control that's baked into the Constitution, right? Again, back to Hamilton. It's a Hamilton view versus a Jefferson view, right? There's a tension baked into our civic life between color blindness and color consciousness, because our documents profess to be color blind, and yet our history, built on the back of genocide and slavery, is completely color bound, right? So how do we reckon with that tension, right? Because those are both parts of our inheritance, right? There's a core abiding tension between pluribus and unum, right? On the back of our coins, right? The idea that is the point of America to foster incredible diversity of all kinds, or is the point of America to take that diversity and be a unified people that has some common bonds, right? All these tensions. So you have to get, in the same way that you got to get literate in power, you got to get literate in these core American arguments. Once you are, you realize that, like, the fight that we're having about repeal of the Affordable Care Act, the fight that we're having about tax cuts, the fight that we're having about any issue that's a contemporary issue in 2017 is a fight that we've had over and over in this country, right? The ACA fight is the same fight we had about the New Deal, right? About how much federal involvement is overreach, right? How much can the federal government mandate that we do or not do, right? How much should we let the federal government do and tell us what's good for us, right? So anyway, I think that getting intelligent emotionally and getting intelligent civically to have better arguments is key. So, and I know we want to bring in some more audience questions too.
Question. I was going to say.
Yeah, I have another audience question. This person is having a hard time motivating young people to go out and vote. So do you think you could give us a quick elevator pitch that, like, all of us can bring into our communities to motivate young people? Yeah.
So here's a really quick version. Don't be a chump. Right. and I mean it kind of seriously, like, do you know, or you could put it more sarcastically, do you enjoy being a sucker? Do you like being someone's doormat? Right? Because when you don't participate, when you don't vote, like, you know, there's no such thing as not voting. Right? This is super important to remember. Not voting is voting. Right? Not voting is voting to hand your power, to give your power to someone else who's going to use it completely against your own interests. Right? So not voting is basically wearing a kick me sign on your back. Right? And I think that argument is better than the kind of the more usual eat your vegetables, you know, it's good for you and good for the body politic argument, because that argument only moves nerds like us, right? But I think more people respond to, I don't like being anybody's chump. I don't like being bullied. I don't like being made a fool of, right? And not voting is essentially being made a fool of, right? And I think that's how I'd come at it in part. The other part actually is we're actually right now in several cities around the country. Citizen University is running a project called The Joy of Voting. In 7 cities around the United States, started last year and it's running through next year, we are reviving in local elections a culture that used to exist in the United States. It was all over Texas at one time. A culture of joyful, raucous, participatory engagement around voting in elections, right? Street theater, open-air debates, dueling bands, parades, you know, bonfires, the kind of stuff that you do in a, you know, UT A&M football game, but around voting, right? This used to be all over the United States, and TV kind of killed it, and now our other screens have really kind of killed it. But we had this notion of there's no good reason why we couldn't revive that, right? And so we've been in these cities inviting artists, musicians, citizens like you, neighbors, old folks, whatever, to come out and play, basically, right? And I tell you about this project because, again, you got to activate the joy, right? It can't just be eat your vegetables. It's got to be more like join the party, join the club, right? So in Miami, one of the projects in this Joy Voting project, you know, Miami's a party town, so they did an all-night party with the city's hottest DJs, and the only way you could get in was to show that you were registered to vote. Right? In Akron, Ohio, which is a very different political culture, they got young people to start performing kind of impromptu political plays on the back of a pickup truck that was going from neighborhood to neighborhood, right? These projects are all locally rooted. In Texas, I'm sure you'd come up with a good Texas way to do it, but it is about activating the joy and the kind of affirmative purpose of, I want to be with others doing something that brought all of you together here on a weekend when you could be doing other stuff, right? So, yeah, I think that's key.
So we can take another, actually, I guess going back on that kind of idea of polarization, so do you think that there's going to be some positive effects that come out of sort of our whole 2016 bubble?
I think there already has been a positive effect. You know, I don't give Donald Trump credit for a lot of things, but I will give him credit for this. He has single-handedly sparked the greatest surge in civic engagement in this country that we've seen in half a century. And I'm not just talking about progressives who are in the resistance, so, you know, quote unquote. I'm talking about reform conservatives who are principled conservatives and realizing that trucks are getting run over their conservative principles right now about rule of law, about kind of prudence in government, about so forth, about respect for tradition, right? I'm talking about libertarians who are realizing there's an opportunity here because both major parties are completely cratering, and young people like you have grown up. You've grown up all your lives with an a la carte approach to life. You make your own playlists, you choose your own transportation modes, you know, and you are not really that interested in a duopoly of one-size-fits-all choices, right? And so libertarians see this huge opportunity right now, right? So across the spectrum, people are organizing from the Women's March to, you know, the Federalist Society, which is a conservative legal organization in D.C., has something called the Article 1 Project. What is Article 1 of the Constitution about? Come on, somebody here needs to know. It's Congress, right? And the reason and the reason why they called this project the Article 1 Project is they said that in recent decades, Republican and Democratic administrations, this country has grown an imperial presidency, right? That the presidency has come to dominate our government in a way that is contrary, in their view, contrary to the intentions of the framers. And that you got to put Article 1 back where it belongs, which is to put Congress back front and center, right? They were saying that a lot during the Obama years, and to their credit, they are still saying it during the Trump years, right? Because it was, if you didn't like how President Obama created DACA, if you were a conservative who said that the creation of the DACA program, which enabled dreamers, young undocumented people to stay here legally, if you didn't like that then you should also not like the way this administration has kind of willy-nilly dropped travel bans all over the place without having, in a half-baked way. That in both cases, you have, in both cases you had presidents acting out of frustration with a Congress that wouldn't do what they wanted to do. And anyway, so I think this idea right now of, I think we are in a moment of a surge of civic engagement. I think that might be, let me be real. There's also great darkness in the land right now. And I think, I imagine in this room are people who themselves or their families are big supporters of the current occupant of the White House. And I do not mean to say something, I'm not saying anything partisan here. I believe that when you have a president who routinely and blithely disregards other branches of government, who routinely and blithely tries to undermine the legitimacy of both a free press and an independent judiciary, we are entering into uncharted waters as a republic. And it is especially if you are a conservative. It is especially if you are a Republican. It is especially if you believe in conserving what is great about our constitutional scheme, that you ought to be joining folks across the political spectrum who are expressing concern about this, right? And I feel like this is a time where, John Adams said, back when, when we were getting started, he said, in that very John Adams, again, how many of you have seen Hamilton or followed Hamilton or listened to the soundtrack? Okay, so, Lin-Manuel Miranda kind of gives John Adams a bad rap, but John Adams was kind of a cranky skeptic, and one thing he said, which was, historically true, was there has never yet been a democracy which did not eventually commit suicide. Okay, and democracies commit suicide usually by voting in the person who delivers the poison pill, right? Adolf Hitler came to power through completely legitimate democratic means. He got the Reichstag and the parliament to enact special laws granting him special powers as chancellor, right? So the question isn't about what's quote-unquote legal. The question is about how do we hold norms of self-government together, right? And we practice those norms. If you want to, you can practice that by protesting or getting engaged in what's going on in D.C. But frankly, the best antidote to what's going on in our national politics and what's menacing and dangerous about it is to start exercising your citizen muscle in Abilene or in Denton, right? Or in Houston or in Dallas or in Fort Worth or wherever, right? Practice power and exercise your citizen muscle right here, because if you can get yourselves and your neighbors just used to self-government and get out of the habit of being a spectator watching this crazy reality TV show, right, and into the habit of being participants on the field, decision makers, then our country will be able to weather these changes, right, and what's going on right now. And I am net optimistic. I do believe that we are a resilient country that way, and I think, but I think it's especially for people your age and your place right now to take seriously what it means to govern yourself, right? When I talk about character, like govern yourself. Like how do you show up? And then how do you show up with others and for others, right? And that, once we spread that and radiate, that too will grow from the middle out and the bottom up in a way that makes the president, whether the president is one you like or don't like, of less prime importance. It's about us.
Thank you.
This audience member wants to know when you realized that you had civic power. Like, was there a moment that it all just clicked for you?
That's a great question. I think I would sort of just say what I said earlier. Like, when I worked in D.C. and, I worked in the halls of power, right? I had an office in the West Wing. I learned about power, but I didn't feel like I had power, right? I was exercising power delegated to me by you, right, in that office. But where I came to learn that I had power was, again, as a citizen of my city and a member of my state and my state's political community, right? And working on the issues that I've worked on. I've co-chaired 3 school levies in Seattle Public Schools, right? We haven't lost a school levy since in 20-some years, right? Maybe more. That's power, right? That's not power in a way that makes headlines. It's not power in a way that you put on your resume alongside working at the White House, but that's actual power, right? That's actually getting people to do something for the greater good that takes the longer view of things. And there are plenty of communities in my state and in your state, probably even more, that don't pass school levies, that don't pass library levies, where you can't get people out of their zero-sum thinking, right? And so I feel like that's where I really began to exercise it. And so in a way, like, I'm on fire to do this stuff because I feel like I'm late, right? You're early. When I was your age yet, I did not yet realize the full extent of my civic power, right? And so I'm super excited about the fact that all of you in your late teens and early 20s are getting lit, right? I don't mean that way. You may be getting lit later, but are getting. I mean are yeah, exactly, yeah. Can we please stop the live stream here? This is I think that's super exciting, right? And the compounding benefits of that to you and to your country are going to be awesome.
Another way that you could say getting lit is getting woke.
Yes.
Getting woke.
Absolutely.
So the question that we wanted to ask kind of plays into what you're mentioning in terms of getting civic engagement to become a more prominent item in our communities. But what we are curious about is how do we educate constituents now that we're planning to eliminate the stigma of voting to understand what they are actually voting for in the elections?
Well, I think here too, I would really like, this ought to be a program actually of this center to do a design charrette for young people, like coming up with ideas by young people for young people to educate other young people on the issues, right? So I'll tell you about, in Seattle we have an alternative newspaper called The Stranger. I don't know what the Austin alternative paper is here, but we have this alternative paper that, like many alt papers, is very is very hip, right? And tries to be very deliberately not like a stodgy establishment entity. And they do this fun event every election cycle called Candidate Survivor, where they get city council candidates to come. And it's this combination of a quiz show, game show, talent show, and kind of gladiator show, basically, right? And drinks are flowing freely, and it's fun, and it's a party, but, young people are designing the questions, and some of them are silly things like, can you play a song? Can you do this dance? Others are kind of spontaneous, putting candidates on the spot, like, why did you vote against this thing? Why are you against, supporting my community or whatever, right? But it's this thing that is a way, and it's packed with people your age, right? Coming up with stuff like that, I might be able to come up with stuff like that, but I just turned 49, right? You do not want a 49-year-old coming up with ideas to get 19-year-olds interested in this stuff, right? But I do think kind of getting, and again, actually activating art and music and kind of creativity can be part of this too. Again, there's only a tiny slice of people represented by us who will actually we are the ones who actually ever read the voter's guide that comes in the mail, right? But most people won't do that. And so how can you educate in a way that, like think about this state. One of the things that's actually, one way in which this state leads the country is in the creativity and entrepreneurial spirit of the religious community, right? Churches here, whether they're tiny little churches in West Texas, like I was describing earlier, or they're Joel Osteen and his, mega thing, like like they're entrepreneurs, right? You have a thick ecosystem of faith leaders who come up with creative ways to engage people and draw people in and hold people in, right? You need to apply that same level of creativity and entrepreneurialism around civic engagement, and literally sometimes taking some of the same plays out of the playbook, right? Joel Osteen has figured out a bunch of things that you should copy, right? You should, right? And so has your small town pastor, who, in spite of the fact that the town is declining and hurting or aging or whatever, has figured out some really important things about how to keep on holding a congregation together, right? So has the imam who's sustaining a mosque, in a city where he is surrounded by people who might have hostile views about Islam, right? All these folks are being creative and entrepreneurial about how do you hold a faith community together, and I would encourage you also to look around at what's Texas good at. That's one of the things Texas is good at. How can you take what Texas is good at there and map it onto how you'd want to do peer-to-peer awakening and engagement?
We have time for one more question. This one comes from Emily Bandari. How can you use your power to generate or bring out character in others and in our elected officials?
So I think you're doing it. I think, one of my heroes in Seattle, but he's a hero just in general, is Bill Gates Sr. He's the father of Microsoft Bill, right? And Bill Gates Sr., longtime lawyer, leading member of the American Bar Association, big citizen, just a big citizen in the bar, in the law, in politics, and he has standing to say something that he always says. As the father of Microsoft Bill, he says, there is no such thing as a self-made man, right? So when Bill Sr. says that, your ears perk up, right? Because Bill Gates seems to the world to be the quintessential self-made man, right? And what Bill Gates Sr. means when he says that is Microsoft Bill emerged out of an ecosystem that leaders sustained on purpose, right? And that ecosystem was, in part, the University of Washington, a public university that got great support and funding such that it could have a computer science program at the very dawn of the computer age, right? And an outlet of that computer science program put some of the earliest computers into the Lakeside School, which is a private school in Seattle where younger Bill went, right? And where Bill and his buddy, classmate Paul Allen, decided to play with this brand new thing called a computer, right? But it was also an ecosystem of living in a community, which was Seattle, that was safe, where you could breathe clean air and drink clean water, right? Where people, where you were not in fear of violence on the streets, right? There was this ecosystem that fostered Microsoft Bill, right? In Mogadishu, Somalia today, there's someone with just the same IQ and just the same level of hustle as young Bill Gates. But but there's no chance, right? There's just no chance for that. That dude is not going to start a multi-billion-dollar tech company, right? What a freaking waste, right? And you don't have to go to Mogadishu, right? In every one of your communities, there is that person who has all the talent in the world, who has all the hustle and hunger in the world. Many of you in this room are that person, right? All the hustle you would want, but you don't have the ecosystem to support you, right? And therefore, dots are never going to get connected, things aren't going to click, and the evolution won't ever happen, right? I think that what you've got to do when you go back and leave the symposium and go back to your communities is you've got to commit to thickening your ecosystem, right? You've got to commit to whether you're from a small town or a big city, to start doing that magic act of organizing and getting 1, 5, 10, 50 other people to start joining you in a gathering. Join a club. Start a club, right? If something doesn't exist that's like this, make something like this. Say, hey, I just went to UT Austin for this incredible event for a weekend, and we don't have anything like this in Denton or whatever, or and I'm not just talking your campus. It could be your campus, but it could be your hometown too. We should start something like this. We should start a Civic Ambassadors Club in our community. And we should, I think, again, this sounds nerdy, but it is no nerdier and no goofier than what Ben Franklin did to become one of the greatest citizens of making our republic, right? Like, it's my biggest word of advice to young people. Be like Ben. Like, Ben Franklin was this kind of addicted club maker, right? He couldn't stop. He made stamp collecting clubs and debate clubs, philosophical clubs, science clubs, the first subscription library, the first post office, the first volunteer fire department, right? Make a club, right? Because once you start creating a circle of a bunch of other people that you do this with, that will sustain you. It will be fun. You will push each other. That's a way you will be able to practice both power and character the way it's meant to be practiced, which is not in isolation, right? The worst thing to happen would be is if each of you all-stars went back to your campuses and communities and remained an isolated gold star. That'd be a shame, right? It'd be a shame if all that happened was you got back to your campus and the rest of your campus continued to be indifferent. You continue to have this on your resume as one of your gold stars, and that's all, right? You got to start making, it's sort of like LBJ. You got to make your gold star club, right? It's not the white stars or the black stars. Make a gold star club in your community of people who decide to show up. And that's my last note that I'll say is Bill Gates Sr., the title of his memoir, which I would commend to all of you actually. It's a short book which is super insightful about how he and his now deceased wife created a family culture, right? With everything from like family Olympics to family meeting to family rule. They created a family culture that was part of the ecosystem that begat Bill Gates, right? But the title of that memoir is Showing Up for Life. And to me, that's just about the best definition of citizenship I can think of. Like, you just got to commit to showing up and creating arenas where you're inviting other people to show up. And if you bring in joy, if you bring in creativity, if you make it not eat your vegetables, you can do that in ways that will sustain and really spread.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank you, ambassadors, for those questions, and those of you who were sending in those questions too. They're really great, thoughtful questions. And I know after a little break here, we're going to have some time where I get to sign some books, and I'll be happy to continue having conversation during that book signing with anybody who's interested. And seriously, if you're interested in some of what we're doing at Citizen University, stay in touch. You already heard my Twitter handle, Eric P. Liu. Our website at Citizen University is simply citizenuniversity.us. We're on Facebook as well. And we've got a lot of projects going that actually would be great to get some of you involved in, which you can check out on our website. So please stay in touch, and thanks again for having me.
All right, give them a
Thank you.